My story is an interesting one. I'm not exactly sure how to categorize my experience, but I'll just say that I love the art and act of spelunking. I've gone exploring in several different cave systems, all the way from the Pacific Northwest down in Arkansas and many other states that offer deep, adventurous, and lush cavern systems that all interconnect. I have even had my hand in discovering some unknown cave systems, and even diving in to see where they lead. So on this particular adventure, I took a close buddy of mine whom I grew up with. Him and I love the act of adventure and exploration, but what we had no idea was what we would find. Normally, when we enter in cave systems, we come in with all the necessary supplies, safety equipment, lights, everything you need to be safe, and even a knife, just in case you need it. This was the first time I ever ran into something living in one of these cave systems. I know there are living things in caves, like bats and even maybe small animals, very small, but never in my life could I have imagined we would have ran into what we did. So, my story takes place in Texas, where a friend and I discovered an unknown cave system, or at least what we thought was at the time. This particular area had experienced heavy flooding before, and at the time, the flooding had completely receded, revealing a deep channel in the earth. Not a huge cave mouth, but one that we could slip into. We were excited and ready to see exactly how far this tunnel went down into. We went in with all the supplies we needed, and probably spent at least a couple hours traveling what I suspect to be at least near 2 miles deep in. A little bit of noting, this tunnel wasn't man-made, nor was it made by an animal. This was clearly a cavern that had been covered by water, and was wet and muddy as you could expect. And due to the flooding and water in the area before, you can imagine why this was completely covered and not accessible. But now with the water removed and drained, we can now travel in. As we made our way initially in the tunnel, we had to travel at a 45-degree angle downward, crawling on our hands and knees. It was a pretty tight squeeze, but several points it opened up to larger chambers that allowed us more freedom of movement, to actually stand up at some points, while most of the time we had to crouch. And if you're claustrophobic at all, well, I don't recommend the sport. After a while, we eventually reached a larger opening. From here, this had several tunnels or chambers we could travel through. The act of finding something undiscovered was incredibly exciting, and my friend and I, still full of energy, adrenaline, and excitement, wanted to explore every which avenue we possibly could. After re-upping on some water and snacking on a couple of protein bars, we started taking some tunnels that eventually looped around, bringing us back to this main chamber. Then, we took one of the tunnels off to the right, where going through, we began to smell a kind of stink. If you've ever smelt an animal's den before, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. It wasn't like a smell of blood or death or a rotting animal. It smelt more like a thick, musty smell. But at the time, I just contributed that to much of this being underwater not too long ago, so I didn't think much of it. I figured I was smelling the remnants of rotting plant matter and other biomatter. Boy, was I wrong. We traveled through this tunnel for quite some time, and at the time, we had really good headlamps, so visibility was great for both of us, and packing extra batteries. After much time tight crawling, and squeezing our way through other tight holes and up and around more chambers, we came into another very large chamber that kind of dropped off like a cliff at some point, down to a lower chamber. What I think had happened is these at one point were 2 separate chambers, but the wall or part of the chamber had collapsed at some point. And for those that don't know, caving involves a lot of climbing over large boulders and rocks, because let's face it, a lot of these cavern systems are collapsed tunnels of some kind, many being lava tubes, which I suspected that some of these were. It was here that we actually came across large bones everywhere. My friend and I thought this to be odd, because we were easily 2 miles into the earth. Not straight down, but 2 miles deep into this tunnel, at least. Why would animal bones be down here? Some sort of animal, probably predatory, must have made its den down here. We started to go through a mental checklist in our head, crossing off every animal that didn't exactly fit the criteria for keeping animals down here, and due to the flooding of it just receding recently, that doesn't exactly leave a lot of time for a bear or a cougar to come down here and haul a lot of bones. There was a very, very fair amount of bones. If I had to guess, I would say somewhere between maybe 6, 7 deer, assuming that's what it was. Possibly cattle. There were no full skeletons, of course, just rib bones, femurs, and skulls. All the skulls looked to be of either cattle or deer of some kind. Everything scattered throughout, and these bones weren't very old either. They were somewhat fresh, probably within the last 30 days. Some of them looked to even still have meat on them, at least very little, like something had been feeding down here. I told my friend how odd I thought that was, because what kind of animal comes down here and does that? That's when my friend and I both felt that something was wrong about this scene. We were too far into this cavern system for any animal to conveniently come down here and make a den. I could see a small tunnel, maybe 10, 20, 30 feet, and then a small opening in a cavern. But this, there was too many tight squeezes, too many chambers, and too many tunnels we had spent the last 3-4 hours climbing and chambering through to get down here. Nothing should be down here living, and nothing should be able to pull a deer cadaver down here to feast. So something was down here. Even though we didn't feel right about it, we weren't exactly scared at this point, just more curious at what this could have been. But we ignored any notion we had of leaving, or being scared that there was some unknown cave monster lurking about us. We took this as an opportunity to explore more of the chambers around us, which, by the way, were several. Taking the tunnel nearest of us was actually tall enough, at least partially, that we could walk through without actually having to duck, which was a nice change of pace from all the crawling and crouching we had been doing to get down here. Our knees and elbows were already sore, and I didn't bring sufficient elbow pads or knee pads, something any experienced spelunker will always have with them. This tunnel seemed to go on forever, and at some point, maybe 10 minutes in, it's hard to remember exactly when, but not too much longer after we entered it, we can hear something large entering the tunnel, coming in our direction. My friend and I both stopped in our tracks, turned around to face that direction, and had our ultra-bright LED headlamps pointed in that direction, waiting for something. Although we couldn't exactly see anything, we could hear it coming up to the tunnel, and whatever it was sounded big, because it was barreling now, going faster and faster, picking up speed. At first, we thought or suspected it was a person, but the closer it came, we could tell that whatever it was wasn't just taking a quick, easy pace. It was barreling through the tunnel. It was going fast. After us, or what, I'm not sure. And we could hear, by how loud it was, that this was much bigger than a person. An animal, perhaps. That's when my friend started taking off, continuing in the direction we were entering. I bolted after him, completely letting fear take over me that we had some sort of large predator coming after us. We continued running like crazy until we came to yet another large opening. This opening having a fairly large chasm in the middle of the room. Luckily, the gap of the chasm was maybe only about 2 or 3 meters, one that we could cross if we had enough air, which both of us did, and continued on. The tunnel that this one continued down wrapped around to yet another chamber, which, again, took us back, after some time, to yet another chamber, which, again, led us back to the original chamber that we found the bones in. We used this as an opportunity to escape this chamber full of bones and head back the way we came initially to get back to the surface, which would be probably another 2+ hours in a tunnel, which was fine by us. We were just trying to get away from whatever was pursuing us at this point. Now, As we were entering the tunnel to head back to the surface, or back to the other chambers which would eventually lead us back to the surface, thank God, in hindsight, that we hadn't forgotten our way. We could hear more of them. And I say them because I don't exactly know what it was pursuing us, but there was more than one. The one barreling through the tunnel that we had taken through was coming back to the chamber that we were in, and we heard another one directly behind us, just out of our line of sight. What's creepy is that it felt like it was just staying out of the light, almost watching us as we were fleeing. The further and further we made it through the tunnel, away from that chamber full of bones, we eventually got to the main chamber that would lead us back to the surface. Whatever was following us down in that chamber seemed to stop following us up to these more main chambers that were higher up on the ground. Remember, a lot of this cavern expedition was a lot of tunnel traversing down at roughly a 45-degree angle. Not just the initial entry of the tunnel, but most of it. So we were truly going down into the earth the entire time. So the way back up was even more treacherous and much more endurance heavy because we were going up at an incline. The way back seemed much faster, probably because we weren't exactly taking every safety precaution we could, and going much faster than we had originally descended into. Once we reached the surface, we both collapsed out of sheer exhaustion that we had pretty much exerted every bit of force and energy we had to get us out of there. We spent the next 5 minutes probably just trying to catch our breath. And I want to make a note, my friend and I were already in great, amazing shape, which is one of the only reasons why we were able to do what we did. Him and I are both, I don't want to say athletes, but we both do run marathons. We're always running and working out, as you should be if you want to spelunk. You gotta be in tip-top shape. And I feel like that's really the only reason we were able to make it out in the record time we did, and traverse as much area as we could in the time that we did. We talked about what it could have been, and neither of us are sure, but we both started talking about the details of what he heard, what I heard, and they matched up. We also both agreed, whatever it was incredibly large, much larger than us, and did not sound like it was on all fours, or quadrupedal. I'm not here to paint some crazy fictional picture that we somehow encountered cave monsters, but I will say that I do think it's very possible we potentially came upon the den of some unknown, subterranean predator of some kind, at least as far as I'm concerned. And while this experience hasn't completely deterred me from spelunking and caving in general, it's made me think a lot more about certain caves that I go into, and being much better prepared upon what I come across.